I still remember the exact moment my world tilted. My sister's wedding had been a grand spectacle. Chandeliers dripping with crystals, a ballroom filled with flowers, photographers darting around to capture every moment. My parents spent more than $80,000 to make sure Madison's big day looked like something out of a magazine. I smiled through the whole thing, clapping for her, telling myself that when it was my turn, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me the same way they saw her, as someone worth celebrating. But when my turn finally came, it wasn't celebration that I was met with. It was rejection so sharp it nearly broke me. I called my parents the day after Ethan proposed. I thought it would be a happy call, the kind where your mom squeals on the other end and your dad clears his throat to hide the emotion in his voice. I wanted them to be proud of me, to feel even a fraction of the joy I was carrying in my chest. Instead, I got silence. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, "Ethan asked me to marry him." And I said yes. There was a pause, a long one. Then my father's voice came through, cold and flat. "You're marrying your mechanic." The word stung. He didn't say Ethan's name, didn't even acknowledge the man who had been by my side for years. To him, Ethan wasn't a person. He was a job title. I swallowed hard. "Dad, Ethan is more than—" But my mother cut me off. "Hannah, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us?" For the family? Embarrassing. That's the word she chose. Not congratulations, not we're happy for you. Embarrassing. As if the man I loved was some kind of stain on their reputation. I held the phone to my ear, numb, listening as they explained that they wouldn't be paying for anything, they wouldn't be showing up, and they would not, under any circumstances, stand by me as I married someone they saw as beneath us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just stood there, staring at the wall while my parents disowned me in the softest, most casual tone, like they were talking about canceling dinner plans, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because hours later, I sent them a single photo of my husband, and within minutes, their voicemails turned into panicked screams. When you grow up in a family like mine, you learn pretty quickly where you stand. My sister Madison, the golden child, was always front and center. Homecoming queen, straight-A student, the one my parents bragged about at dinner parties. And me? I was the shadow in the background, the responsible one, the one who never asked for much, so they gave me even less. Still, I loved them. I wanted their approval, no matter how many times I told myself I didn't need it. That's why their rejection cut so deep. They had showered Madison with everything. A designer dress, a 5-tier cake, a honeymoon in Italy. But for me, their eldest daughter, their response was shame and silence. And the cruelest part? They didn't even try to hide it. My father's exact words still echo in my head. "Marrying a mechanic embarrasses us. You should think carefully before you go through with this." That was the moment I realized something important. My parents didn't see me, they never had. But Ethan saw me. He always did. That's where this story begins. With a wedding that never was, with parents who chose status over love, and with a single photo that shattered everything they thought they knew. You see, what my parents didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly have prepared for, was that Ethan was more than the grease on his hands, more than the oil stains on his shirt. He was more than the label they slapped on him the moment they learned what he did for a living. And when I pressed send on that photo, when I showed them the truth about the man I married, their perfect little world came crashing down in ways they never expected. So if you think you've heard stories about family betrayal before, let me tell you, you've never heard one quite like this. Because this isn't just about a wedding. It's about love, pride, secrets, and the moment my parents realized they had underestimated me. And him. When people talk about family, they usually imagine warmth, support, and unconditional love. I used to imagine that too. But in my family, love always came with conditions, and support was given only if it made my parents look good in front of others. Growing up, my world revolved around my parents' obsession with appearances. My father, Charles Carter, was a corporate manager who cared deeply about climbing the social ladder. He wasn't the kind of dad who came to soccer games or helped with homework. He was the kind who checked your report card to see if it was impressive enough for him to casually mention at his company's networking events. My mother, Linda, had a talent for turning every family moment into a performance. She lived for neighborhood gatherings where she could boast about Madison's new piano recital or how Charles had just closed a big deal at work. To her, family wasn't about closeness. It was about competition. We weren't just living our lives. We were props in her never-ending show of, look how perfect we are. And then there was my sister, Madison, 2 years younger than me, but she may as well have been the sun around which the entire Carter household revolved. She was pretty, bubbly, and always knew how to say the right things. Teachers adored her. Friends flocked to her. And my parents? They spoiled her beyond belief. When Madison wanted ballet lessons, she got them. When she asked for a brand new car at 16, she got that too. Her every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated like it was history in the making. When I got into college on a scholarship, my dad's only comment was, "That's good." At least it didn't cost us anything. I was the responsible one, the one who didn't cause trouble, who handled things on her own. And because I didn't demand attention, I didn't get much of it. I told myself it didn't bother me. But the truth? Every time my parents threw a party in Madison's honor and barely noticed me standing in the corner, a little part of me wondered if I would ever be enough for them. Thing came to a head at Madison's wedding 2 years ago. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a production. They rented out a ballroom at a luxury hotel, hired a string quartet, and had a cake so tall I wondered if it needed structural support. My parents spent more than $80,000 to make sure every detail was perfect. Guests whispered about how beautiful everything looked, how radiant Madison was, how proud Charles and Linda must be. And me? I smiled for the photos, handed out champagne, and stood in the background like always. Nobody asked me when my turn would come. Nobody noticed how I blinked back tears, watching Madison slow dance with my father, his face glowing with pride. That night, I promised myself something. When my wedding day came, I wouldn't care about chandeliers or cakes or ballrooms. I just wanted love. I wanted my parents to look at me and see me for once, to see that I, too, had found someone who made me happy. Fast forward to the day Ethan proposed. We were standing in the driveway of his shop, of all places. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange, and Ethan's hands were still stained with grease from fixing an engine. He pulled a small box from his pocket and looked at me with those honest blue eyes that had never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. "Hannah," he said, his voice soft but steady, "you're my best friend, my partner, my everything. Will you marry me?" I didn't need a fancy speech. I didn't need rose petals or violins. I just needed him. And so, with grease-smudged fingers slipping the ring onto mine, I said yes. In that moment, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Ethan didn't just love me. He saw me. The parts of me my parents overlooked, he cherished. The things they mocked, he admired. And yet, as I drove home that night, a pit formed in my stomach. I knew my parents. I knew how they measured worth. And I knew Ethan didn't fit their checklist. He didn't wear a suit to work. He didn't belong to country clubs. He didn't have a degree they could brag about at cocktail parties. Still, a small part of me hoped, prayed that they'd surprise me. That maybe, after years of disappointment, they'd prove me wrong. That when I called to share my joy, I'd hear excitement in their voices. But deep down, I think I already knew. I knew that in their eyes, I'd never be Madison, and Ethan would never be enough. The night after Ethan proposed, I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smile, the ring glinting in the fading sunlight, his arms pulling me close. My heart was overflowing, but beneath the joy was a knot of anxiety. I knew what I had to do. I had to call my parents. I sat at the kitchen table the next morning, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ethan was still asleep, his soft breathing drifting down the hallway. For a moment, I thought about letting him rest and sparing myself the possibility of heartbreak. But I couldn't put it off. They were my parents. Surely, deep down, they'd want to know their daughter was happy. I took a deep breath and dialed. The line rang twice before my mother's voice came through, crisp and rehearsed like always. "Hello? Mom, it's me," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "I have some news. Ethan proposed last night. We're engaged." Silence. Long, stretching, suffocating silence. Finally, I heard my father in the background. "Engaged?" His voice was sharp, almost mocking. He must have grabbed the phone because the next thing I knew, his tone was directed squarely at me. "You're marrying your mechanic?" The way he said it, like it was a curse, like Ethan was nothing more than the dirt on his boots, made my chest tighten. "Dad, he's not just a mechanic. But my mother cut in. Her voice was low, controlled, but every syllable carried judgment. "Hannah, do you understand what this means for us? Do you understand how embarrassing this is?" Embarrassing. The word stung worse than a slap. I swallowed hard. Embarrassing? "Mom, he loves me. Isn't that what matters?" My father scoffed. "Love doesn't put you in the right circles. Love doesn't make people respect you. Do you think we can hold our heads high when people find out our daughter married some man covered in grease all day?" Tears pricked my eyes. "So that's it? You care more about what the neighbors think than about my happiness?" "You don't get it, Hannah," my mother snapped. "We've worked our whole lives to build this family's reputation. Madison's wedding showed people who we are. Successful, polished, respectable. And now you want to throw it away by marrying beneath you?" My voice cracked. "Beneath me? You're talking about the man I love." "He fixes cars, Hannah," my father said bluntly. "Do you really think that's the kind of man who can take care of you? Provide for you? Represent this family?" I gripped the phone tighter, shaking. "He already takes care of me. He treats me better than anyone ever has. Why can't you see that?" But I already knew the answer. They didn't want to see. When I hung up the phone, my hands were trembling. Ethan found me minutes later, sitting on the kitchen floor, my knees pulled to my chest, tears streaming down my face. He knelt beside me, wiping my cheeks gently with his rough, oil-stained fingers. "What happened?" I choked out the words. "They said, marrying you embarrasses them. They won't come. They won't even acknowledge it." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed soft. "Hannah, you don't need their blessing. You have me. That's enough." But in that moment, it didn't feel like enough. I felt like a little girl again, desperate for my parents' approval, crushed under the weight of never being good enough. The days that followed were a blur of whispered conversations among relatives and cold stares from my parents. Word spread quickly in our family. Some cousins called to say congratulations, but even those conversations carried an awkward edge, like they didn't want to get caught on the wrong side of my parents' disapproval. I overheard my aunt once, whispering into the phone, "Can you believe it? Hannah's marrying a mechanic. After all Charles and Linda did for her, all they did for me," I thought bitterly. They had done everything for Madison. For me, they had done nothing but measure my worth against a checklist I could never fill. The rejection weighed heavily on me. Every wedding dress I tried on felt tainted by their absence. Every time Ethan and I talked about flowers or venues, I wondered if I was being foolish for hoping my parents might change their minds. But the truth was clear. They weren't coming. They didn't care about me. They cared about how I made them look. And marrying Ethan, my Ethan, was in their eyes a shame too heavy for them to bear. That was the breaking point. That was when the conflict shifted from painful words to a choice I had to make. Would I keep begging for scraps of love from parents who only cared about appearances, or would I finally choose myself? I didn't know it then, but that choice would lead me to send a single photo that turned my parents' smug rejection into absolute panic. I spent days replaying that phone call in my head, each word cutting deeper than the last. Every time I thought about my mother calling Ethan embarrassing or my father sneering at the idea of a mechanic being good enough, I felt like I was drowning. Their voices became ghosts that followed me into every conversation, every wedding plan, every quiet moment with Ethan. I wanted to let it go. I wanted to brush it off and move forward. But their rejection wasn't just about them refusing to support my wedding. It was about them refusing to see me, refusing to value the man I loved, refusing to believe that my happiness could matter if it didn't come wrapped in wealth and prestige. One evening, as Ethan and I sat on the back porch of our small but cozy house, I broke down. "They'll never come," I whispered, staring into the fading light. "They'll never love you no matter what you do." Ethan leaned forward, his hands warm around mine. "Hannah, I don't need them to love me. I need you to love me. That's enough." His words were steady, his presence grounding, but a storm still raged inside me. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about respect, about standing up for myself in a way I had never dared to before. That's when I realized I had a choice. I could keep shrinking under their judgment, or I could finally show them the truth about who Ethan really was. A week later, the decision came to me as naturally as breathing. I was folding laundry when Ethan walked in from the garage, his shirt smudged with grease, his hair damp with sweat, and his smile wide from solving a tricky repair. He looked tired but proud, and in that moment I didn't just see my husband. I saw the man who built a life with his own 2 hands, the man who worked tirelessly to give us security, who laughed with me at midnight when bills piled high, who kissed my forehead every morning before work. I grabbed my phone. "Hold still," I said. He chuckled, wiping his forehead with his arm. I'm covered in oil." "You sure this is the look you want?" I smiled. "Exactly." "Don't move." I snapped the photo right there. Ethan standing in front of the modest garage that doubled as his workshop, his wedding band catching the light, his smile unguarded and pure. Behind him, parked in the driveway, was the car he'd surprised me with last year, one he'd rebuilt himself piece by piece. To anyone else, it was just a snapshot of a man after a long day's work. But to me, it was proof of his strength, his heart, his character. Proof that love didn't need chandeliers or ballrooms to be worth celebrating. And then I sent it. No long message, no desperate plea. Just the photo and 4 words. "This is my husband." At first, there was silence. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, wondering if I'd just made a mistake. Maybe they would delete it. Maybe they would roll their eyes and carry on with their lives, smug in their judgment. But then the calls started. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. My phone lit up with Mom, then Dad, then again, over and over, their names flashing across my screen like alarms. I didn't answer. A voicemail icon popped up, then another and another. Within minutes, there were half a dozen, then a dozen more. I turned on the speaker and pressed play. "Hannah!" My mother's voice was shrill, cracking with something I had never heard before. Panic. "Call us back." "Please, you have to call us back. Do you know who he really is?" Another message, my father this time, his tone frantic. "This can't be true. Tell me you didn't marry him without knowing. Hannah, pick up the phone." I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the words. What were they talking about? Why were they panicked instead of furious? Message after message poured in, their voices escalating from anger to desperation, from judgment to pleading. For years I had begged for their attention. Now they were fighting for mine. I didn't know the full truth yet. Not then. All I knew was that everything had changed. My parents, who had dismissed Ethan as an embarrassment, were suddenly desperate to reach me. Something about that photo had flipped the script. Something about seeing Ethan as more than a mechanic had rattled them to their core. And as I sat there, phone buzzing nonstop in my hand, I realized I wasn't the one who should feel small anymore. For the first time in my life, the power had shifted. I didn't answer their calls, not yet. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, listening to their voices spiral into fear, and thought, now they finally see what I've always known. What I didn't realize then was that their panic wasn't just about me defying them. It was about a truth they never saw coming, a truth that would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Voicemail after voicemail, message after message, my parents' voices climbing higher and higher with each attempt to reach me. By morning, I had over 20 missed calls and nearly a dozen messages. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pressed play on the first one. "Hannah, call us back immediately." My mother's voice trembled. "You don't understand what you've done." The next was my father's, filled with raw urgency. "Where are you? Answer the phone. We need to talk about Ethan. This is serious panic, fear." These weren't the tones of parents who disapproved. These were the tones of parents who were desperate, terrified even. For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. Ethan walked into the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower, and saw the phone in my hand. "They're blowing it up again, aren't they?" I nodded, biting my lip. "They sound scared." "Scared?" He tilted his head, clearly puzzled. I swallowed. "They said, 'Do I know who you really are?'" A slow smile spread across his face, but it wasn't mocking. It was gentle, almost relieved. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "Hannah, I was waiting for the right time to tell you. I never wanted this to define us." My heart thudded. "Tell me what?" He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. His thumb brushed against the ring on my finger. "I'm not just a mechanic, Hannah. The shop you see out back, that's just one of many. I inherited the business from my uncle years ago. I've expanded it. We have multiple locations now, across 3 states. We've built a reputation for being honest, fair, and reliable. I'm not just fixing cars, I'm running the company." I blinked at him, stunned. "You own the company?" He nodded. "I kept quiet because I wanted you to love me for me, not for what I have. And you did. That's why I never said anything. But your parents? The second they put 2 and 2 together, they realized the man they dismissed as a grease-stained embarrassment is a multimillionaire who built something real." The pieces clicked in my mind like tumblers in a lock. My parents hadn't been panicking because I married beneath me. They were panicking because they had misjudged him. Badly. They had burned the very bridge they were now scrambling to rebuild. I laughed. Not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. Years of their rejection, their judgment, their favoritism toward Madison. And now they were the ones begging for my attention. "Do you want to call them back?" Ethan asked softly. I stared at my phone, the screen lighting up again with another incoming call. "Mom." For once, I didn't feel that old desperate tug to answer, to please, to prove myself. For once, the power was mine. I pressed play on another voicemail. My father's voice, usually so composed, was cracking. "Hannah, listen to me." We didn't know. We didn't understand who he was. We made a mistake. "Please, we need to talk to you." There it was. The admission I'd been waiting for my entire life. Later that afternoon, I finally picked up. The line was instantly filled with frantic voices. "Hannah," my mother cried, "why didn't you answer sooner? Do you realize what you've done?" I kept my voice calm, even. "I married the man I love." My father jumped in, his words tumbling over each other. "But Ethan, he's not just—" "Hannah, we didn't know. We thought he was just a—" His voice trailed off, embarrassed. "Just a mechanic?" I finished for him. "The same words you used to shame me?" Silence. The first time in years I'd heard them speechless. I took a deep breath. "You judged him without ever seeing him. You judged me without ever knowing what I needed. And now, suddenly, you care? Suddenly, you want to be part of my life because you realized he has money?" "Hannah, please," my mother started, her voice cracking, but I didn't let her finish. "No, for once you're going to listen. Ethan has never made me feel small. He has never treated me like I wasn't enough. You did that, and I'm done begging for your approval." The silence on the other end was heavy, broken only by the sound of my mother's soft sobs. My father tried to recover, tried to sound stern, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "We only wanted what was best for you." I shook my head. "No, you wanted what looked best for you. There's a difference." And with that, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from their judgment, free from their conditional love. They had spent years making me feel small, but in that moment I realized something they never had. True worth isn't measured in status or money. It's measured in love, loyalty, and integrity. And Ethan? He was richer in those qualities than anyone I had ever known. When I hung up the phone that day, the silence in my kitchen felt different. For the first time, it wasn't suffocating. It wasn't filled with my parents' judgment or my desperate need to win their approval. It was peaceful. Ethan walked over, his hand resting on my shoulder. "You okay?" I let out a long breath and nodded. "Better than I've been in years." Because the truth was simple. I didn't need their blessing. I never had. What I needed was exactly what I already had. A man who loved me for who I was, not for how I looked on paper. Of course, my parents didn't stop trying. For weeks after that conversation, the voicemails kept coming. Sometimes they were angry, dripping with guilt and accusations. "Hannah, you're being dramatic." "We only want to help other times," they were almost pleading. "Sweetheart, please, just come for dinner. Let's talk this through. Bring Ethan. We'll make it right." But I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had nothing left to say. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, their recognition, their pride. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need any of it anymore. My sister Madison tried too. She called once, her tone defensive. "Look, Mom and Dad didn't mean it like that. You know how they are. They just want what's best for us." I almost laughed. What's best for us or what looks best for them? Madison hesitated, then sighed. "Hannah, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Harder." That word made me realize she still didn't get it. For her, everything had been easy. The love, the support, the lavish wedding. She couldn't understand what it felt like to be the forgotten one. So I ended the call, too tired to explain the decades of hurt she'd never noticed. Meanwhile, life with Ethan blossomed in ways my parents could never understand. We didn't have chandeliers or a string quartet at our wedding. We had fairy lights strung across the backyard, a barbecue buffet, and the people who truly loved us standing by our side. Ethan's friends from the shop came, their hands rough and their laughter loud. My college roommates flew in, hugging me like I was family. My aunt on my mom's side showed up, quietly whispering, "Don't let them take this joy from you." And when I walked down the aisle in a simple lace dress, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, I knew I had everything I needed. Our vows weren't about riches or appearances. They were about long nights fixing cars together in the garage, about coffee shared before sunrise, about choosing each other no matter what. Ethan didn't promise me perfection. He promised me honesty, loyalty, and a love that would never make me feel small. That was worth more than any ballroom wedding my parents could have bought. And in the months that followed, I started to see my parents' behavior for what it truly was: insecurity. They weren't proud of Madison because she was Madison. They were proud because she made them look good. And they weren't ashamed of Ethan because he was unworthy. They were ashamed because he didn't fit into the image they had carefully constructed. When they discovered who Ethan really was, the successful business owner, the man with wealth they could brag about, their panic wasn't about me. It was about themselves, about the bridges they had burned, about the access and status they realized they had thrown away. That's what hurt the most. Not that they didn't approve of my wedding, but that even when they tried to come back, it wasn't because they loved me. It was because they wanted something from me. And I decided I would no longer play that game. Looking back now, I see their rejection as a gift. Painful, yes, but a gift nonetheless, because it forced me to grow. It forced me to finally draw boundaries I should have drawn years ago. It forced me to stop begging for scraps of affection from people who could never give me the kind of love I deserved. Instead, I chose love freely given. Love that didn't need chandeliers or approval or status to exist. Ethan still laughs about it sometimes. Imagine if they'd just accepted me from the start. They'd have spared themselves all that panic, but I shake my head. No, I needed to see the truth. I needed to know they'd never change, because once you stop chasing people who refuse to see your worth, you realize how much stronger you are without their approval. So here's what I've learned. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose you, who fight for you, who love you when the rest of the world tries to tear you down. My parents may have lost their daughter the day they chose pride over love, but I gained something better. I gained freedom. I gained clarity. And most importantly, I gained a partner who makes me feel more than enough every single day. And that, more than any ballroom or reputation or approval, is worth everything. So that's my story. A story about love, betrayal, and the moment I realized that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that truly has your back. My parents may have tried to shame me, but in the end, their judgment only made me stronger. Because I chose love, I chose respect, and I chose to finally see my own worth. Ethan and I built a life together on our own terms, without chandeliers or approval, but with something so much better. Honesty, loyalty, and a love that never wavers. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that for all the ballrooms in the world. If you've ever felt like you weren't enough for the people who should have loved you unconditionally, I want you to know this. You are enough. You don't need anyone's permission to live your life, to love who you love, or to create your own happiness. Thank you for watching and for letting me share something so personal with you. If this story resonated with you, it would mean the world to me if you could like this video, share it with a friend, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts or even your own experiences. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that dig deep into love, family, and finding strength where you least expect it. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of the ones who truly see you.